Number 15. Matteo Messina Denaro. He bragged he could fill a cemetery with his victims. Yet for 30 years, no one could find him. But what finally gave him away wasn't a gun, a phone call, or a traitor. It was something far more unexpected. Matteo Messina Denaro, nicknamed Diabolic after a comic book anti-hero, was Cosa Nostra's Ghost King. Born into a mafia dynasty, he rose through the ranks with raw violence. By the 1990s, he was orchestrating bombings across Italy, targeting churches, art galleries, and even judges. He helped run one of the most brutal eras in Sicilian mafia history, including the infamous 1992 assassinations of judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Then he vanished. For decades, no photos, no fingerprints, nothing. But in 2023, authorities tracked him down at a private clinic in Palermo, undergoing cancer treatment under a fake name. He walked in calm. He knew it was over. The arresting officer said Denaro looked at him and smirked. "You found me." Number 14. Vito Cassioferro. He dressed like royalty, spoke in whispers, and disappeared enemies with elegance. But behind the silk suits was a mind sharper than any blade. Vito Cassioferro was one of the earliest legends of the mafia, running operations in Sicily and planting deep roots in America. He's believed to be the man behind the 1909 murder of NYPD officer Joe Petrosino, the first US cop killed by the mafia on foreign soil. Why? Because Petrosino dared to investigate Italian organized crime. Ferro's power was so vast, peasants in Sicily would kneel when he passed. He once told an Italian journalist, "Men fear me because I make them disappear without a trace." But despite his empire, he was eventually captured during Mussolini's brutal crackdown on the mafia. His end was slow. In prison, stripped of power, he died alone and malnourished. Years later, no one knew where his body was buried. Some say that was his final order. Number 13. Bernardo Provenzano. He ruled without speaking, commanded without showing his face, and stayed invisible for over 40 years. But what truly made Provenzano terrifying wasn't his violence, it was his silence. Bernardo Provenzano, known as the Tractor, first made his name as a hitman for Salvador Rina. However, after Rina's arrest in 1993, Provenzano transformed the Sicilian mafia into a stealth empire. He banned unnecessary killings, minimized media attention, and ran everything through tiny handwritten notes called pizzini, hidden inside loaves of bread and delivered by loyal couriers. He operated from a remote farmhouse in Corleone, avoiding phones, cameras, and even his own family. By the time police found him in 2006, he hadn't used a computer or mobile phone. Yet he controlled millions through extortion, drug trade, and fake businesses. When they raided his hideout, they found Bibles covered in coded messages. Each verse was a command. Number 12. Joseph Profassi. He ran the mafia like a monarchy, ruthless to the core, yet untouchable for decades. But his empire cracked the moment greed turned into rebellion. Joseph Profassi founded the Profassi crime family, known later as the Colombo family, in the 1920s. Publicly, he was a devout Catholic and olive oil magnate. Privately, he extorted his own members, demanding monthly tribute payments and threatening brutal punishment for any disobedience. Tensions exploded in the late 50s when his top men revolted, sparking what became the First Colombo War. Kidnappings, torture, and disappearances followed, but Profassi stayed in power through sheer intimidation, leveraging deep Sicilian loyalty and corruption inside law enforcement. He died of cancer in 1962, peacefully at home, never once convicted for his crimes. However, the war he triggered didn't end with him. One capo said, "He made saints pray for death and sinners pray for him." Number 11. Albert Anastasia. He walked into rooms and made everyone sit straighter. But when he left, bodies often disappeared, because when Anastasia gave an order, it wasn't up for debate. Albert Anastasia was the co-founder of Murder Inc., the mafia's enforcement arm responsible for hundreds of contract killings during the 30s and 40s. He ran it like a corporate hit squad, sending out death warrants with surgical precision. No questions, no second chances. Later, he seized control of the Gambino family, ruling with explosive temper and zero tolerance. His unpredictability made even his allies nervous. In 1957, while getting a shave at the Park Sheraton Hotel, masked gunmen stormed in and executed him. No warnings, just bullets. The hit was so precise, many believed it was greenlit by rivals like Vito Genovese or Carlo Gambino. His last sight? His own face in the barber mirror, just before the glass shattered with gunfire. Number 10. Frank Costello. He ran the mafia like a Wall Street executive, sharpened suits, clean hands, and deals made in whispers. But even in silence, Costello controlled everything. Dubbed the Prime Minister of the Underworld, Frank Costello led the Luciano family after Lucky's deportation and became the go-to liaison between the mafia and American politicians. He never carried a gun, but his bribes shaped elections, bought judges, and silenced threats. In 1957, Genovese tried to take him out. A gunman shot him in the head, but Costello survived. He stepped down, not out, allowing Genovese to take the reins while he lived comfortably in semi-retirement. During the televised Kefauver hearings, when asked what he did for a living, Costello famously said, "I make a living." Despite everything, he died of a heart attack at home, a rare ending for a man with that much dirt on everyone else. Number 9. Joseph Bonanno. He built an empire so loyal they called him Joe Bananas in headlines, but never to his face, because Bonanno didn't just demand respect, he engineered it. At just 26, Joseph Bonanno was named boss of one of New York's 5 families and ruled for over 30 years. He was a quiet tactician who kept his family united with Sicilian loyalty and tight internal discipline, but beneath that order was constant paranoia. In 1964, he disappeared. No one knew if he'd been kidnapped, murdered, or just fled. 19 months later, he reappeared with a strange story. He'd been held against his will. However, many believed he staged the Vanishing Act to avoid a brewing mafia civil war. He later wrote a book, A Man of Honor, breaking the code of silence, yet he was never killed for it. Bonanno lived to 97, outlasting nearly every mobster of his generation, something almost no one else managed. Number 8. Giuseppe Morello. He had one hand like a claw, and the other held the reins of New York's first mafia empire, but his grip wasn't physical, it was psychological. Giuseppe Morello, known as the Clutch Hand, ran counterfeiting, extortion, and racketeering across Manhattan in the early 1900s. His organization was the blueprint for all future crime families. From his East Harlem base, Morello printed fake currency so realistic that even banks couldn't tell the difference. He enforced loyalty through pure terror. Bodies were found chopped up and stuffed into barrels. That method became so infamous, it started what newspapers called the barrel murders, terrifying even seasoned detectives. However, his ambitions drew heat. In 1910, he was arrested and imprisoned for counterfeiting, and his power slowly faded. But his structure, hierarchies, codes, and silence lived on in every mob family that followed. He may have been the first to unify the mafia in America, and he made sure no one forgot it. Number 7. Russell Bufalino. He barely spoke in public, rarely showed anger, and never made flashy moves. But every major mob decision passed through Russell Bufalino. Operating out of northeastern Pennsylvania, Bufalino wasn't a street enforcer, he was the architect behind the scenes. He controlled unions, trucking, and international smuggling operations with quiet precision. Other bosses feared him not because of violence, but because he knew everything. During the height of mob influence, the FBI ranked him among the most powerful men in the country. Bufalino was best known for one thing, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Many believe he ordered the hit and that his consigliere Frank Sheeran carried it out. But no body was ever found, and Bufalino never faced charges. He died in 1994, free and unbothered, just as he lived. When law enforcement tapped phones, even rival bosses warned each other, "Don't say his name, he hears everything." Number 6. Salvador Maranzano. He declared himself boss of all bosses and expected the mafia to fall in line, but in doing so, Maranzano signed his own death sentence. After winning the bloody Castellamarese War in 1931, Salvador Maranzano reorganized the mafia into 5 families. He brought in military discipline and ancient Roman-style hierarchy. However, his pride blinded him. He viewed younger bosses like Lucky Luciano as threats and began planning to have them eliminated. Luciano struck first. Just months after Maranzano's coronation, assassins posing as IRS agents entered his office and stabbed him and shot him to death. His body was found sprawled across his desk, still clutching paperwork. That moment ended the reign of absolute bosses and paved the way for the modern mafia's commission structure. Luciano would later say Maranzano thought like Caesar, but forgot what happened to Caesar. Number 6. Giuseppe Masseria. He played cards while bullets flew and died with the hand still in his grip. But his fall triggered the mafia's complete transformation. Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria ruled New York in the 1920s with an iron fist. He extorted everyone, from gamblers to fellow gangsters. His paranoia grew by the day. He demanded absolute loyalty and crushed anyone who hinted at independence. However, younger bosses like Lucky Luciano were growing tired. As the Castellamarese War erupted, a brutal power struggle between Masseria and Salvador Maranzano, New York became a war zone. Murders escalated, alliances flipped, and blood soaked the streets. Then came the final betrayal. In 1931, Luciano invited Masseria to lunch. While Luciano excused himself to the restroom, gunmen entered and gunned Masseria down mid-card game. He died holding an ace of spades, ironic for a man who gambled with every life around him. Number 4. Vito Genovese. He helped build the Mafia's empire, then tried to crown himself king, but power, in his hands, turned into poison. Vito Genovese worked beside Luciano in building the modern Mafia structure, but while Luciano favored balance, Genovese wanted total control. After fleeing to Italy in the 30s to avoid a murder charge, he collaborated with Mussolini, then returned to the US after World War II, ready to take what he felt was his. He forced Costello out, took over the Luciano family, and renamed it after himself. His true obsession? Controlling the heroin trade through the infamous French Connection pipeline. It made millions, but drew heat. By 1959, rivals had had enough. He was set up, arrested on drug charges, and sentenced to 15 years. Even behind bars, Genovese tried to run the family, proving ambition doesn't die with freedom. Number 3. Carlo Gambino. He never raised his voice, never showed his hand, and yet became the most powerful mafia boss in America. But his genius wasn't in violence, it was in patience. Carlo Gambino rose through the ranks with quiet calculation, avoiding the flashy mistakes that took down other bosses. After Anastasia's assassination, Gambino stepped in and slowly built his empire. He consolidated power across unions, ports, construction, and trucking, all while keeping a low profile. Unlike rivals who craved headlines, Gambino stayed out of courtrooms and newspapers. He lived modestly, dressed simply, and smiled often, yet anyone who crossed him vanished. His control over the commission made him the silent king of Cosa Nostra. Even the FBI admitted, "We know he's the boss, but we can't prove a thing." He died peacefully at home in 1976, unindicted, untouched, and still ruling from the shadows until his final breath. Number 2. Charles Lucky Luciano. He was arrested, exiled, betrayed, and nearly killed, yet Lucky Luciano still built the very foundation the American Mafia stands on today. Luciano modernized the Mafia, ending the violent chaos of the 1930s by eliminating bosses like Masseria and Maranzano. Then he created the Commission, a council of 5 families to manage disputes and prevent wars. It was organized crime's version of a government, and it worked. Luciano understood diplomacy. He partnered with Jewish mobsters like Meyer Lansky, expanded rackets beyond Italian circles, and brought logic into a world ruled by emotion. But his past caught up. In 1936, he was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years, though many believed the charges were fabricated. During World War II, he struck a deal with US intelligence, providing naval protection in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was released and deported, but his influence never faded. Even from Italy, he controlled operations in New York, proving exile couldn't erase a legacy built in blood. Number 1. Salvador Toto Rina. He didn't just break the rules, he made war against the entire country. But Rina's downfall wasn't a bullet, it was silence cracking from within. Salvador Toto Rina rose from poverty in Corleone to become the deadliest boss in Sicilian mafia history. Nicknamed the Beast, he waged open war on the Italian state during the 80s and 90s. Judges, police chiefs, and politicians were bombed in broad daylight. The 1992 murders of Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino weren't just assassinations, they were declarations of war. Rina believed fear was the strongest weapon. He killed anyone who hesitated, including women and children, even rival mafia members' families. But in 1993, after years on the run, he was captured in Palermo, just blocks from where he'd once ruled. In prison, he showed no remorse, but his arrest shattered Cosa Nostra's code as dozens turned informant, destroying the empire he built with blood. These were the most feared mafia bosses in history, but did you catch who vanished for 19 months without a trace? Watch again, and don't miss our next video, and don't miss our